Think we're good. Sweet. Hey, folks, it's that time of the week and it's time for a worm topic. So, what are we talking about this week? We're going to talk about black gold. So, most people think worm castings are just a fancy compost. And that misunderstanding is why their soil never really gets to where it's going. So, we'll kind of dive into that today and that assumption and how that can kind of take something that's really good and kind of make things terrible for you in your garden. The reason that doesn't work is because people lump worm castings in with compost and other fertilizers, excuse me, and they don't quite understand what makes worm castings different. And that's what we're going to kind of talk about right today. Black gold. It's not just decomposed material. I mean, it is. It's gone through a worm's belly and been processed and pooped out, right? That's what we're talking about here, worm poop, or a cast or castings. When we lump all of these things in together, we run into big problems. And the reason is because all of these things should be utilized differently. They all have a different purpose and a different way that they're used, right? It's kind of like when we go to the grocery store and we're looking at different types of uh, food. It might all be noodles, but you got to use them differently. Some noodles you can throw into a boiling water on a pot on a stove. That's the right way to do that, right? Others you can put into a bowl of water into the microwave. That works. Others, the instructions will tell you to place the noodles in a bowl and then pour boiling water over them and allow them to sit. All of these are still noodles at the end of the day. They're just you use them differently. And the same thing goes for fertilizers, organic amendments. They all have the same name. They might be different here and there, right? But they're all used differently. And we got to understand what they are and how we use them in order to get the biggest bang for our buck. Because at the end of the day, these amendments usually cost money, some of them more than others. And if we don't use them correctly, we're basically flushing those amendments and money down the drain. Nobody wants to do that. So, what is kind of the what are we looking at when we're looking at worm castings? And the way I kind of like to look at it is when we're looking at worm castings, it supports a living soil, right? And it's kind of like this framework where we talk about air, water, food, and microbes, right? That's the framework of a living soil. Air, because everything living needs air, your microbes and your plants needs water. Everything needs water, right? Your plants, other living things. You need food. We as humans need food, so does your plants, right? And so do the microbes in your soil. But in order for all of that to work to give the plant exactly what it needs, you need to have the microbes. This is where worm castings come in, and this is why they're called black gold. One reason is because they're black, but the second reason is because it's gold, because it's extremely valuable. Gold is extremely valuable as its own, on its own, right? And you don't need a lot of gold for it to be very valuable. Even small rings, earrings, right? Even just a stud, anything. It is valuable because it's in a small quantity. Worm castings are the exact same way. They are extremely valuable in small quantities. Because of the way worms are worm castings are created, they kind of have this ability to be able to make things worse if you use too much. So we really want to be careful and only use a little bit so that we get the biggest bang for our buck. Here's the other thing. Why would I pour all of this water into a plant if it doesn't need it right then and there? It's going to waste, right? And the same thing happens with worm castings. If we use too much, a lot of that goes to waste, and it can actually be detrimental to our plants because of something called growth inhibitors that are inside of them. We won't talk about that today, but don't use a lot, just use a little. It's gold for a reason because you don't need a lot of it, because you don't need a lot of it to be valuable. All right. Now, if you find this type of stuff interesting, go ahead and give it a like, follow, share. You can join us on the Living Soil community on School. Uh, and now let's just get back to it. All right. So, one of the biggest myths is that worm castings are so valuable because of their high amount of nutrients. NPK, numbers. The real value is not in the NPK on the bag. It is the things that they bring to the table to the soil. What do they actually bring to the soil? Well, it's biology, it's microbiology, it's microbes, it's microorganisms that we can't see with our visual eyes, and they're super tiny. That's what they bring to the table. That's what makes them extremely valuable. And again, another reason we call them black gold. It's not the NPK. If we go to the store and we look at all the bags, right, and we read all the NPK labels, right, if we go to compost, it'll usually have like a 322, 333, 4 something, right? It's usually 5 or below. And now if we're looking at, different types of fertilizers, we're talking about like pearls or granules or something like that, they could be a lot higher. They could be 10, 10, 10, 14, 14, 14, 11, 12, right? That's really, really high. Now, when we go to the worm castings, guess what we have on those bags? 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 1, 0. What does that mean? That means that the nitrogen, potassium, and um, phosphorus that's in it are extremely low. Extremely low. So it's not about the nutrients that worm castings bring to the table. It's about the biology, the soil biology, the microbiology that they bring to the table. This is why using fresh worm castings is massive. It's huge. You got to be able to get the fresh stuff because that's when the biology and the life inside of it is actually still alive and still kicking and thumping and doing what it's supposed to, like it does in nature. If we get a bag that's been sitting on the shelf for who knows how long from a manufacturer that had it in a truck for who knows how long, that was shipped from wherever it was shipped from, a lot of those things don't have the biology, a lot of the biology that used to be in there left because it's died off. It's in a sealed bag. It's been in a hot truck or a cold truck, and a lot of those microbes just can't survive that, especially if the bag is sealed and the material's been dried out. Now you're removing the oxygen and you're removing the water that those microbes need to be able to live. So, freshness is huge when we're talking about organic material, when we're talking about worm casting specifically. It is huge. So if you can find a local producer, that's going to be great. If you can find somebody a state over or 2 states over, that's good as well. You just don't want something from across the country or another country. Across the country or from another country. Yeah, don't want that. You want to bring it as close as possible to get it as close as possible to where you are, right? There's something called bioregions that everything is broken up into. If you can stick with your bioregion, that's going to be really good. Now, let's kind of dive into a real example of worm castings. Worm castings are kind of like a probiotic, right? They kind of get everything ready. A probiotic gets get everything ready in your body. It gets everything churning, right? Those things help your body break down other things so that it can actually absorb it. This is what worm castings do, right? The compost and things that we add to the when we add organic material to the soil, right? It has to be broken down. It has to be broken down by microorganisms. Well, there's something called microbe factories that run around in the soil, and these factories are helping by dropping worm castings all over the place to be able to help break down all of this organic material and feed that plant. These microbe factories are called worms, and these things that they're dropping around the root zone and all over the soil are called worm castings. Worm castings have this fantastic biological life all wrapped together in this little bitty ball, right? That helps maintain moisture. It helps spread those microbes all over the place. And that is actually how your plants gets nutrients. Those microbes break down organic materials in the soil and release soluble nutrients that your plant can immediately uptake. That's the magic of worm castings. When you miss the biology in the soil, when you're missing the biology in the soil, or it's not there, or it disappeared, which happens when we stop watering or we expose the soil to we open up the soil, we rip a plant out or it's exposed to the elements. those microbes die. We got to put those guys back in there. Mother Nature does this naturally by putting worms into the soil, right? But if you don't have worms, then worm castings is a better option for you to get that life in there. You can I know you're going to ask, can you add worms? Yeah, you can add worms, but here's the thing. If your soil doesn't have worms in it right now, there's a reason for that. They can't live there. Something's off and something's wrong. So, if your soil has some worms in it, like you see every now and then you see a worm, then maybe the conditions are right. You just don't have enough of them, right? But in any of these circumstances, you can always grab the worm castings to give your plant all of the necessary nutrients that it needs to be able to grow and flourish. So, black gold. It's called black gold because you don't need a lot of it. You just need a little bit of it. It goes a lot farther than you think. So follow whatever's on the manufacturer's bag for instructions. If you buy worm castings from me from Las Vegas Worm Farm, then I will tell you to use about 10%. That's the number that I came up with an agronomist when we got it tested. I don't want you to go over 10%, or you will get reduction in growth. And that's just because they're so strong, potent. That's the word. You don't want to use too much. You want to stick with just the right amount. So whatever's on the bag, what they tell you to use, that's what I would use. The next thing I would tell you is that if you are picking up black gold, make sure that you pick up something that is local. Local is always going to be best. Now, here's the other option. If you can create some worm castings on your own, let's say you have a worm farm and you create your own worm castings, some of the best soil amendments that I've seen are the ones that people make in their backyards. The compost piles, the worm bins, they're really diverse and they have a lot of microorganisms in there. Those are some of the best. So if you can create your own, I would go about it that way. One thing I would remember is that the black gold is important because of the biology in there. It's not because of the nutrients in the bag. Okay. There's not a lot of soluble nutrients for your plant to be able to uptake. A lot of those microbes have kind of eaten that and stored it inside of their body. And until they release that, it won't be available to your plant. So we're not really worried about the numbers on the bag because we're not feeding the plant. We're not fleeting, we're feeding the soil system around the root zone so that it can feed your plant. We're mimicking what Mother Nature does here naturally. If you want to feed the plant, then you can go for those bags that say, NPKs that are high, 14, 14, 14. Usually these are soluble nutrients, chemicals that will feed your plant immediately. If you know what your plant is deficient in, then you can do that. Um, Growing organically and growing naturally, mimicking what Mother Nature does using living soil is just a different approach. Those two things don't match. They don't work together. Okay. So the next thing worm castings bring to the table, right, besides just the biology, well, not just the biology, but what else the biology can actually do for you is that can actually transform that soil. So if you have soil that is pretty nasty, whether that's a lot of sand or whether that's a lot of clay, right, or it's just not what you think soil would look like, then adding that biology in there will actually help create soil. It's not converting anything, right? It just makes it act differently, right? So the biology in the soil has the ability to be able to glue things together and it will glue aggregates together so that your soil will act more porous. It will create more pore spaces to allow air to infiltrate. This will provide an aerobic environment for your plants to be able to grow, be happy. It's a place in the soil for your plant roots to be happy. That's what they will do. They're not necessarily, they will change the soil, but we're talking about hundreds of thousands of years for that to be able to occur, right? Like bacteria creates enzymes and acids that can wear down stones or sand, silt, and clay particles, right? But a bacteria is really tiny, right? So that's going to take time. Just like weathering in nature, right? Like rain just doesn't immediately wash or weather away a rock. It takes time, and so does this biology. But it does have the ability to be able to aggregate soils, make clumps here, clumps there, so it creates space to allow water and air to kind of go in there. Now, if you're like, Dennis, I don't need any more air in my sandy soil, I get it. I understand. The microbes will help, though, break down some of that organic material that's in the soil so that your soil can now hold on to more moisture, more nutrients, which is lacking in a sandy soil. Worm castings can be used at any time. If your soil is crappy now, but it gets better later, that's okay. You can still use it. You don't have to like set back and be like, yeah, I'm good to go. I don't have to use it anymore. There are times when you need to keep going with it. And usually that is, or sometimes when that is when you see deficiencies in the soil. Or more likely, deficiencies in the plant. You might not see things going wrong in your soil unless you have a microscope, but you can definitely see things going wrong with the plant, which will tell you that you need to do something with the soil. So you can use the worm castings at any point in time, right? Just remember, a little goes a long ways. So you can use it in your seed starting mix, right? Mix it into your seed starting mix. If you're doing a potting soil or raised bed mix, you can add it into your raised bed mix. That gets everything started. If you're like, you know what, Dennis, I don't I want to use it sparingly, the way you're saying, then what I would recommend is that you put it at the bottom of every planting hole. So instead of mixing it into all of this, what I do is I just, when I'm going to transplant whatever plant I'm doing, whether it's a flower or a vegetable, or a tree, I put it at the bottom of the planting hole. Now, what happens if your plant's already established? Well, there's a couple of ways you go around this. You can create an extract, which is a liquid, and then you can pour it onto that soil surface so that it goes down into the root zone. Another option is you can spread everything apart and kind of dig into there and get it into the root zone. That's not, can you do it? Yes. Does it work? Yes, it will work. But you're disturbing the roots at that point, possibly, right? And is it as efficient as getting it right in there where the roots are? No, it's not. One thing I would avoid completely, totally, and all the time is top dressing. I would never ever top dress with worm castings. Now, this goes back to what we talked about earlier. We talked about the NPK, and there's not much in it. So, what are we buying when we buy black gold? It's the biology. Everybody knows that the sunlight can sterilize things, right? You remember back in the day when we used to bring UV lights into the hospital? They probably still do. You take the UV lights, you put it in the hospital, and it's supposed to, and it eradicates all the biology in there because it kills all the viruses and bacteria and all that stuff. Well, if you top dress and sprinkle worm castings on top of the soil and it gets touched by the sun, bye bye microorganisms. They're going to fry in the UV. So never ever top dress. I would not do that. I would get the root. My recommendation is when you transplant, put them at the bottom of the thing, bottom of the planting hole. And then if you are going to amend the bed and you need to pour it on or you need to get it everywhere, then I would create a liquid amendment and pour that everywhere. A extract. Now, I do want to define extract versus tea. There's two different things here. A lot of people have heard about teas, and not a lot of people have heard about extracts. There's a huge difference here. Teas are when you are brewing for a specific microorganism. You are adding oxygen to water, you are adding microbes, and then you are going to feed a specific type of microorganism in that tea. That's what you're doing. Now, when you're creating an extract, all we're doing is pulling the microorganisms off of that organic material. I'm not feeding anybody. I am just pulling everybody off, putting them in liquid solution so that I can use them in my garden. All right. When do you use these? Extract is a multivitamin. It keeps things going. I don't know what's missing. I'm just like, here's more, right? It's just like us as humans. We eat food all the time, but we take a multivitamin because we want to cover all our bases. We want to make sure that we have zinc, iron, right? Vitamin A, C, D, E, B12, all of that. We want to make sure we have all of it because we might not be eating everything that we need. That's an extract. If we don't know what's missing in the soil and we're like, hey, I just want to make sure that everything stays healthy, we use an extract. Now, we use a tea when we know what is deficient, when we know what is missing, specifically in the soil. This is like going to the doctor and getting a test done, and the doctor telling you that you're deficient in vitamin C or vitamin A or vitamin D. And they're like, you should probably go get vitamin A, D, C, or whatever else that you need because you're deficient in it. This is when we use a tea. We use a tea when we know what the soil is deficient in. and we brew that tea, like I talked about, specifically for the thing that's missing. So if we're missing bacteria, then we brew for bacteria. If we're missing protozoa, then we brew for protozoa. If we're missing nematodes, then we create something for nematodes. If we're missing fungi, then we create something for fungi. That is a tea. We do it very specifically, very strategically when we know what's missing. If we don't know what's missing, then we go with an extract because it's a multivitamin and we're just making sure that everything stays the way it's supposed to. Hopefully that clears up some of those things. All right. I think a few of the common mistakes out there when using worm castings are you use too much. I think that's the biggest thing is people use way too much. I mean, they go overboard, and that's just detrimental because of the growth inhibitors in them. Don't don't do that. It's better to use less than not enough, especially when it comes to worm castings. Now, the second thing I think people or a common mistake that people are making is using old worm castings. We talked about the worm castings black being black gold, and the reason they're black gold is because of the microbiology, the microbes in those worm castings. If you use old worm castings and the bag and the material inside is dry, those microbes are no longer alive. They're dead. They need water to be able to stay alive. So if you have old worm castings, there's probably still something in it, but hardly anything. So I would just sprinkle it on the garden and let it be. At that point, it doesn't matter if it's solarized by the sun because there's probably no life in it anyway. Using fresh worm castings is huge. You want to get them from a local producer and you want to use them as soon as possible. And what I'm trying to say is that you use them as you need them and you use it and you purchase the smallest amount possible, right? So we don't want to save it. We don't want to use it a month later or 2 months later, because the fresher they are, the better they are. There are more microbes that are in it. So when you get worm castings, if they're old, if you have some that are old, I would just get rid of them. I would still use them, but treat them as topsoil or dirt. And then I would get fresh worm castings, and those fresh worm castings I would buy the smallest amount possible, and then if I run out, then I would use more. I don't really want to keep those. I don't want those hanging around. Okay, I want to use them as quickly as possible, and then if I need more, I'll just go get more because I want the freshest product possible. The fresher, the better. And the last thing is what we kind of talked about here already. Worm castings are lumped in with a lot of other fertilizers out there, right? And each one of these products and fertilizers, they serve a specific purpose and should be used in a very specific way. And the only way you really know how they're supposed to be used is if you follow what's on the bag or you know what purpose they serve. Compost serves as food and microbial inoculants in the soil. Worm castings are that biology that makes sure that that makes sure that can cycle nutrients for your plants. Granular chemical fertilizers feed the plant directly, right? Different types of meal, cornmeal, blood meal, bone meal, seed meal, alfalfa meal, all of these feed different types of microbes in the soil, which create nutrients for your plants. But you have to know what you're feeding so that you know how your plant is going to be able to use that or what it's going to provide for your plant so your plant can actually uptake that. All fertilizers are not created equally. They're all different and they all should be utilized differently. So that's it for this week. Thanks for watching, and we'll see y'all next week.